first thing I wanted to ask you is you spoke about a parable earlier, I think of the prodigal son. I wanted to address another parable about the, I guess, God and his tenants, or maybe the landowner and his tenants, where you suggest that God has given certain people, I guess, certain tracts of land, and that He has created them, I guess, as tenants are responsible for that land, and that He has sent, I guess, His servants in order to check on, how they were doing with it. They killed the servants and beat the servants, and eventually He sends His Son. And then He illustrates, or Jesus illustrates after that, that that, and I'm sure you can explain it better than I, but that the servants were prophets, and that Jesus, the Son of God, I guess, is the Christ who has come to, redeem the Israelites, or redeem the land, so to speak. He'll speak about this, but what I wanted to know is that I see what you're saying, that the divide or the divorce between spirituality and ethics is dangerous, but as, I guess, people that have influenced the New Testament, Jesus, Paul, John, and talk about that love is, or that love cannot exist without sacrifice, but can grace exist without sacrifice? In light of that idea, in light of the parable of the tenants, can grace exist without sacrifice? And can, if that's possible, can you have other religions that who see their leaders as prophets or as enlightened beings? Are they, in that case, then valid, with God? Do you see what I'm saying?
Cannot God shower His grace upon people through different prophets apart from Christ? Is that what you're asking?
As illustrated by that parable in the New Testament, yes.
The parable of the tenants.
Yes.
All right. In Matthew chapter 16, Jesus looks into the faces of His disciples and asks, "Who do people say that I am?" Some say, and His disciples respond, "Some say you're one of the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah. Some say you're Elijah." Then Jesus says, "Well, what about you? Who do you say that I am?" And Peter blurts out, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus says, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. This has not been revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." Right there in the midst of syncretism of Caesarea Philippi, with all the temples, all the different idols around, Jesus comes out with this incredibly clear claim that Peter makes and that he affirms. In John chapter 14, verse 6, Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And people often say to me, "Cliff, that's what I don't like about Jesus, His exclusivity." Well, guess what? Every religion is exclusive. Guess what? Every philosophy is exclusive. Guess what? Every professor who teaches you a fact, when they teach you a fact, that's exclusive. The only thing that's not exclusive is an opinion. I just have an opinion. You have your opinions. I have my opinions. It's not true. It's not false. It's just an opinion. That's not exclusive. But every time you and I make a truth claim, every time you and I state a fact, that's exclusive, because what we're saying is the opposite of that, or that which contradicts that, is wrong. So you see, all of us dabble in exclusivity, because every time we make a truth claim, we're saying this is true, and all that contradicts this is false. Now, Jesus made a claim to be uniquely God in human form, and He claimed that the vehicle through which God offers us His grace is through His sacrificial death on the cross. Now, the reason that the cross is so important is because God is good, meaning by that He's just, meaning by that He cannot allow evil to triumph. You see, the problem for all my atheist friends is, if you take your atheism seriously, you have to acknowledge evil ultimately wins. The good die young. Absolutely, it's crystal clear. If there is no God, there is no judge who, at the end of human history, will make sure that evil loses. And so obviously, evil warped people rip off innocent poor people. It happens on a daily basis. Jesus Christ said that God is just and He must punish evil. But He also wants to forgive. But forgiveness is not excusing. Forgiveness is not saying, "Oh, that's evil. Well, let's overlook it." That's not forgiveness. When you forgive, you have to absorb the hit. Jesus Christ claimed that the way God offers us his grace is through his death on the cross, where he takes the hit for my evil. If I reject Christ, what I am in essence rejecting is God's offer of grace, forgiveness. Oh, God's all forgiving, Cliffe. No, God is not all forgiving. If what you mean by that is, you just say, well, I regret I did that, God forgives me. No. God forgives us not by overlooking justice, but by absorbing the just penalty for our wrongdoing. 2 university students in Australia, good buddies. One graduated and became a judge. The other graduated and became a banker. One day the banker was arrested for embezzlement of $1 million. He was to be tried before his buddy, the judge. A lot of speculation in the press. Would the judge let his friend off scot-free because they were in cahoots, they were friends? Or would he throw the book at his buddy to prove what a just judge he was? The courtroom was packed, the jury deliberated, they passed their sentence, guilty. The judge stood and delivered the harshest fine possible against his buddy, the banker. Everybody gasped in amazement. But then everybody watched in wonder as the judge stood up, took off his judge's robe, walked around the bar, extended his hand to his friend and said, but friend, I've just sold my house. I've taken all of my savings out of my bank account, and I'm just going to pay the fine that I just leveled against you. The judge was just. The penalty for that embezzlement had to be paid. He was also merciful, and he paid that penalty so that his friend could be free. That's what Jesus insists God is like. He's just. The penalty for evil is death and hell. He's forgiving. Not meaning by that, he winks at evil and says, oh, boys will be boys. No. He's just. The penalty for evil is death and hell, and on the cross, Christ paid that penalty, thereby offering us God's grace. Grace is not cheap. Forgiveness is not cheap. Forgiveness costs.
But in regards to the tenants, it seems that that sacrifice that you're speaking of the judge and of Jesus is not necessary for grace. Because it seems that Jesus says that they can accept the servants, but they chose not to. And in that case, because they chose not to, that Jesus in the form of the Son was necessary to go, to go to those tenants. And since the tenants killed the Son, sacrifice, the owner of the land comes back and destroys the tenants, right? But I guess in this example, we have that sacrifice is clearing us from that destruction, possibly. But then regardless of that, what I'm trying to say is that I think that, and I'm not saying that. I guess I feel like maybe reformers of the 16th century and saying that yes, we should change, but we should not abandon our piety or the combination of ethics and spirituality. But I do feel that religious bigotry needs to die, and that I think that we should evolve to understand Christ, like you're saying, exclusive, yes, necessary. But Christ is something greater than the man who lived here for 30 years. He is the living word. He is the logos. He is, the beginning and the end. He is the creator and the destroyer. I mean, it's not as small as we like to see it. And I think that interpretation of Jesus is just that man. And maybe that man, I guess, was necessary for the Jewish tradition. But for the rest of the world, I think we have to see Christ as something greater. And Christ is something greater. Would you not agree? And because of that, not in spite of that, I think it's necessary for Christians today to evolve out of this exclusivism that you're speaking of, this exclusive rights to the Jew, just as the Jews had to, and just as Catholics, and just as, I guess, Christian settlers of America had to. We must evolve to include and see Christ as something greater and something more.
All right, but remember, in the same way that I'm being exclusive when I insist Jesus spoke the truth, which means, obviously, I believe that those who contradicted Christ are out of touch with the truth. So you are being exclusive, sir, when you tell me that those people who view Christ the way I do are wrong. And we've got to get to the point where we realize that we're not going to have a fight. All right? We're going to respect each other. We're going to respectfully disagree. You see, so much of this comes down to, what does it mean to be tolerant? For me, if I'm talking to an atheist, tolerance does not mean, yes, my atheist friend, you and I are saying the same thing. That's not tolerance. That's disrespect. It shows I haven't taken the time to take seriously what my atheist friend is saying. If I listen to my atheist friend, I respectfully disagree. But I don't look him in the face and say, okay, now tolerance means we're saying the same thing. It's all the same. That's highly disrespectful for me. That is allowing my brain to go to total mush. What is tolerance for me as a follower of Christ? When you read the Gospels, you'll notice that Jesus never used coercion, manipulation, or deception to convince anybody to follow him. He put the truth straight out there. He loved and respected all people. He didn't denigrate or dehumanize anybody. He was tolerant of whatever a person believed because he understood that the value of a person does not depend upon their lifestyle or their beliefs. Instead, the value of a human being is rooted in the fact that we all are created in the likeness of God. We're all created for a purpose. We all have equal value. I worked in a prison in Massachusetts, and I would go into protective custody and talk with a man who kidnapped little boys, raped them, and murdered them. After being with that gentleman in protective custody, I would go out with the regular population in the prison and play basketball. And the other inmates would come up to me and say, hey man, wait a second, time out. Don't you know who you were just with? Don't you know what that guy did to little boys? And I'd say, yeah, guys, I know. And they would say, well, then how can you even talk to such a piece of dirt? And I'd say, excuse me, sirs, I totally abhor the activity he was involved in. But I can promise you, he still is a human being created in the image of God. Now, that image has been horribly defaced. We'll all agree on that. But he still is a human being. And that is to be the position of us as followers of Christ. That's my understanding of tolerance. You see, what I really am scared spitless of is a definition of tolerance that says, when you say something, I can totally redefine your words. See, that's the breakdown of education. It's the breakdown of communication. When you use words, I better try and respect you enough to understand what are you saying, what do you mean?
A point that I wanted to bring up was his saying that being moral relativist necessitated that you couldn't have any indignation over what people do. But if you're a moral relativist and you believe that there are no morals, ultimately, absolutely, then you having indignation over what somebody does is not inconsistent with your own belief system, because you're not being wrong in doing it. And does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yay. Okay. And sorry, I'm not. What else? Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My point is that if you are a moral relativist, why are you getting morally indignant?
I didn't say morally indignant, I just said indignant.
Why are you getting indignant?
Because I have drives and urges, and I do believe they're biological, that cause me to have certain chemical peaks in my brain that cause certain reactions in my outward behavior, feelings, emotions, state of mind. And
Yeah.
one of those happens to be indignation.
Fine. But hopefully your objectivity, hopefully your rational mind can overcome those chemical reactions, those feelings.
Well, I never said that your rational mind could.
Because if it's all relative, then it really doesn't matter what you do.
The acknowledgement that morality doesn't exist doesn't mean that my behavior has to change.
Yes, if you believe that morality is relative, your behavior better reflect what you believe.
No,
The same way that if I believe
point is-
Jesus is the truth, it better be reflected in the way I behave.
Okay,
And if you believe that morality is relative, it better be reflected in the way you behave. If this guy wants to say he has a racist attitude towards black people, and if I'm a moral relativist, I'm going to say, well, you're right for yourself. I'm not going to get indignant with him because that would be horribly judgmental. Instead, I'm going to say, well, I as a moral relativist disagree with you, but that's just my arbitrary opinion. You have your arbitrary opinion that racism is right for you. Be cool, that's okay.
Is there some reason why you ignore? I mean, like, I was using the microphone. So.
Yeah, I thought I was the one who let you use the microphone.
Yeah, okay. That's not what I'm saying. I don't want to point to anyone and say this, but if there was someone who was racist against African Americans,
Yes.
I would try to convince them that there's no difference between people because of skin color. because I don't want people to be pushed out in society.
Right.
I don't want this because I don't like seeing suffering.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that, I'm not even a moral relativist, I'm a moral nihilist. So that means that I don't believe anybody's right from their perspective or not from their perspective.
Okay.
So I try to propagate what I want to exist, what
All
I
right.
want to happen.
Okay.
I do the best I can to do that, and I have no problem with talking to someone for 2 hours to try to get them to believe that gays are needing equal rights and African Americans need equal rights, et cetera, et cetera.
James Baldwin, the black author, writes some scathing material about white moral relativists who informed the world racism is wrong.
I never.
Obviously, the question is, why is racism wrong? And the point of the moral relativist is, racism is wrong because I say it's wrong. And James Baldwin says, well, excuse me, who on earth do you think you are? James Baldwin is getting at a great point. The point is, if the value of a human being is based on other people affirming their value, we're all in a bunch of trouble.
We are.
The scriptures insist human beings have an innate value that has nothing to do with what other people say. Popular opinion, status quo, a vote of the majority. All human beings have been created by God for a purpose, to love and worship God, to love and serve each other. We have all been given dignity by our Creator. That is the bedrock upon which human value is based. That is why racism is wrong. Racism is not wrong because I, a liberal, white intellectual, have finally reached the realization that racism is naughty. Rubbish.
I don't have.
Racism is wrong because it is an attack on the dignity of a human being created in the likeness of God. That's why it's wrong.
Well, I'd like to respond to that because it wasn't until us liberal white intellectuals thought about racism and started to do something about it that it changed. It wasn't the
Oh
church.
my goodness. Oh, so the liberal white intellectual freed you black folks from racism. Well, I guess you black folks really owe the liberal white intellectuals a debt of gratitude. How about Dr. Martin Luther King? You think Dr. King did just a little bit in fighting racism in the United States?
Yes, and what did the church do about him?
Well, I guess
They
it
didn't
depends
like him
what
very
church you're
much.
talking about.
Yeah, well, Baptist church, Catholic church, any church you talk about, it was very
No.
yeah.
Dr. Martin Luther King preached in churches, sir.
All those churches were very slow to warm up to it.
No, they were not. Dr. Martin Luther King's dad is a Baptist minister, sir. Dr. Martin Luther King's father was a Baptist minister who supported him right from the start. Now, I'm fully aware of the fact that there were plenty of white Christian racist churches that fought Dr. Martin Luther King, and that is a tragedy. But guess what? You don't have to have a PhD in New Testament to know that Jesus Christ attacked racism in his first sermon. Recorded, don't take it from me, read it for yourself in Luke chapter 4. Jesus makes a direct frontal attack on racism. He tells the Jewish people in the synagogue, guess what, guys? God loves Gentiles just as much as he loves you. The Jewish people grab him and try to throw him over a cliff to his death.
Am I safe in assuming that people are afraid of death, generally speaking,
I sure hope so.
and that people are afraid of the unknown?
I
sure hope
so.
So to define what is unknown, they label it as God. And we say that, like Greek mythology, the ancient Greeks had to have believed that. They sacrificed people so that the sun would come up the next day. There's all these religions all over the place that have done this for years. Can it just be that we're afraid and it's a crutch? It's like a comfy blanket that little kids carry around with them?
Sure, that's possible. And I think that's probably happened on a lot of occasions. But when you look at Jesus Christ, there's no way that you can reduce him to a comfy blanket. He's far too disturbing. He commands us to love our enemies. What's so comfortable about that? He commands us to give our money away to feed the hungry and clothe the naked. What's so comfortable about that? He commands us to live sexually pure lives. What's so comfortable about that? He commands us when you've been struck on one cheek, turn the other. What's so comfortable about that?
But I'm just saying, okay, people are afraid of death. So
Yes.
they fabricate this idea that when they die, if they've been good, they go to heaven. right?
No, I'm not fabricating that. Jesus claimed that God created you and me to live for eternity.
But that's what somebody claimed.
Yeah.
I
Now
mean,
the question is, was he blowing smoke or is he speaking the truth?
if people today claim that, oh, God talked to me, blah, 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 we consider them to be crazy.
Not
So,
necessarily.
Generally
We would
speaking,
begin to observe them.
yes.
And I can promise you, if you say that God talked to you and I follow you around and I notice that you're an incredibly compassionate person, full of integrity, that demands respect. And then if you say, I'm going to die and rise from the dead, and you pull it off, I think I'm going to listen very closely to everything you have to say.
Because
That's what Jesus did.
I'm agnostic. I think anything is completely possible.
Do you really?
Yes.
Even that there's a God?
Yes. I completely
Okay.
believe that that is possible.
Okay, good.
But I also believe that there's a lot of other things that are equally as possible and equally as valid. And
Okay.
so how can we say that God is the only way to go? How can the Bible just not be a really good book? Why can't that just be another piece of literature and
Maybe
say
it is.
something to lead
Yeah,
your life?
maybe it is.
What are you going to do when you find out it is?
What am I going to do? What?
When you find out it is a big book of fiction, you're still going to come here and teach these people lies?
No.
Film it
If it
and
becomes-
sell it to people that, I mean, got your little video camera here for personal enjoyment. What are you going to do when you find out it's a myth?
If I find out that Jesus Christ is a myth, then my faith in Christ is bankrupt.
So what do you do?
What are you going to do if you find out that Jesus is the truth?
It's like I get out of luck.
Well, why don't you put your faith in him if you find he's true?
Why put my faith in something I can't prove?
Prove to me that he has a rational mind.
I know him very well, and I know he does.
Have you ever proved his mind?
Yeah?
No, you haven't.
Yeah, I have.
I have.
It's 1 + 1.
3.
Oh, no.
Good.
I mean,
That's exactly why I believe in God.
why?
What's that?
Because the only reason you and I know that he has a rational mind is because of how he articulates. You've never put his rational mind in a test tube to analyze it.
So are you saying...
The only reason I know that God is real is because the amazing order and design of the cosmos clearly points to an intelligent mind. The same way his articulate speech points to an intelligent mind, so the amazing order and design of the cosmos points to an intelligent mind. It's that simple. The same reason that you believe he has an intelligent mind is the reason I believe there's a God.
That argument doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
All right, let's put it another way. The reason I believe he has an intelligent mind is because of his articulate speech. Articulate speech demands an intelligent mind.
Guys, do you have a copy of the Bible with you?
Yeah, that's my copy
Yeah, I was
right
wondering
there.
if you could read a verse for me. It's just,
Sure.
like, it's just like 7 sentences.
All right.
Yeah, it's in the New Testament.
Yeah.
It's 1 Timothy 2, verses 9 through 16.
What was good for you?
1 Timothy chapter 2.
Verses 9 through 16.
I also want women to dress modestly, with decency and propriety, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for women who profess to worship God. A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man. She must be silent. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. But women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety.
Is that the tolerant word of God?
That compassionate conservatism?
Paul is writing the letter to Timothy. Where is Timothy? He is pastoring in Ephesus. We read about Ephesus in Acts chapter 19. We read that in Ephesus they were into goddess worship, Diana of the Ephesians. They were into pantheism, worshiping Mother Earth. That's what they were into. That's the historical context. So, Timothy's ministering in a church in Ephesus with those kind of idolatry of pantheism, goddess worship prevalent around him. Now, Paul is addressing the issue of Adam was formed first, then Eve. Why? I'm not sure. But obviously what pantheism teaches is we come from Mother Earth. And obviously the Bible disagrees with pantheism. The Bible insists Earth is not Mother. Earth is not God. Earth is a creation of God. We don't worship Mother Earth. We worship God. Man was created first, not woman. And that's an attack on that pantheism. which taught, no, 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 we come from woman. We come from Mother Earth. Another example. Women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. Well, what's the problem here? Well, the problem is that certain over-spiritual people viewed sex as dirty, viewed childbearing as a sin. And so Paul is pointing out to Timothy, no, sex and bringing babies into the world is not evil. It's not a sin. And you're going to be kept safe through childbearing if you continue in faith, love, and holiness. Now, what about this bit about women dressing modestly? Well, it's real simple. The Bible continually communicates that materialism is wrong. And a cultural expression of extravagance at that time was gaudy clothing. Same way today. You know, I'm personally embarrassed about how many white Christians had slaves 200 years ago in the United States. But before I get too harsh on those people, I got to ask myself, and what are your blind spots, Cliffe? And it's quite possible that my blind spot is this exact area of materialism. In light of the fact that people are starving to death today, why do I have as much money as I do? In light of how Jesus commands me to clothe the hungry and feed the naked, why do I enjoy as much as I do physically, materially? That could be my blind spot. And obviously what Paul is bending over backwards to do is to point out, watch out for immodesty. Watch out for materialism, from being too generous with yourself and not generous enough with others. What about this bit about not allowing a woman to teach? Well, that's weird, because Paul had a woman named Priscilla teach the great preacher named Apollos. So what's going on here? Well, what's the name of the movie where Barbara Streisand plays that young Jewish woman? Knechtle, right? Go watch the movie Knechtle. And what you learn is young Jewish women were not allowed to get an education. So Paul is essentially saying, ladies, if you've not had an education, don't presume to be a teacher. But obviously, those women who did get an education, Paul used as teachers, as he used Priscilla to teach the great preacher Apollos. You see why it's so important to study context, to read the whole thing through.
Okay, so if you go back and read the Bible, do you come away with a pluralistic view on religion?
I can promise you there's no way you can read the Bible and not support pluralism as a healthy environment where I respect your right to be Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, atheist, or agnostic.
It's not about respect.
But when you read the Bible honestly, you're going to have to acknowledge the Bible insists that there is one true God, and that this one true God has revealed himself most clearly in the person of Jesus Christ. You cannot escape that also. So I, as a follower of Christ, respect your right to be Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim. I'll fight for your right to be atheist, agnostic. But I will also plead with you to seriously consider Jesus Christ.
Will you respect
the evidence
that?
is he's reliable.
I mean, our governments have used those things to not respect other cultures.
Fine.
To be colonialist,
That's not the problem of Christ. That's the problem of those narrow-minded elitists.
They're using the words of Christ to justify their actions.
Yeah, that's right. And people have used a UT diploma to do a lot of pretty warped things. That doesn't tell you anything about UT. It tells you a lot about those warped people. Just because people use Jesus Christ to do warped things tells you nothing about Jesus. It tells you a lot about those warped people. And guess what, you two? I'm totally unimpressed, because you're white. The only folks out here who, in my opinion, have a legitimate case in this argument that you're giving is the African American.